Hey, my name is Lou and I'm an engineer at Noxus. In this short video series, we'll be going over the full process of building an agent for customer support within the platform. This agent will take in customer inputs through email, craft responses based on company-specific data in documentation and web pages, and finally either send that response autonomously back to the client if the original question was answered, or escalate to the adequate team if human input is needed. We'll be going over this process in 4 stages and 4 videos. In this first video, we'll be going over basic agent setup. We'll piece together the main components within Noxus and provide the agent some information to work off of, some documentation and the FAQ webpage. On the second video, we'll be setting up an email integration so that the agent can actually read the inbox it needs to be responding to. We'll also be setting up the basic escalation logic so that the agent knows when to bring a human into the loop. In the third video, we'll be introducing categorization so that if need be, the correct person is brought into the process. And finally, on the fourth and last video, we'll be going over what knowledge ingestion looks like in Noxus. That is, how can the agent build upon new examples that it is fed so that it can improve over time. We'll also be covering some specific examples that really show how we are taking in new data points. No prior knowledge is needed before jumping into this tutorial, so we can get started right away. Here's the landing page for Noxus, which you'll first see when coming into the platform. There's a lot of stuff going on, but for now, let's just go ahead and create a new flow so we can get started with our agent. A flow is one of the building blocks in Noxus. We can define some inputs, a sequence of steps they'll be going through, and finally some outputs that we can then use. For now, let's go ahead and start by renaming our flow. And now let's set up something very simple. An input, a logic node, and an output. To add nodes, I can use this left pane here. And this first option will create an input if I click it. I'll go ahead and also create an output. And then I can rename them by clicking into them. Our flow should expect as a basic input the actual customer query and to provide a response as an output. So let's stick to these two for now and add the logic node in between. Let's add an AI node that's able to take some inputs, craft a response based on them, and provide the response as an output. I can navigate to the AI list of nodes here and select generate text. And I'll rearrange these. I'll bring our input and connect it to the input of the node, and the same for the outputs. I can also rename this. And let's look at generate text for a minute. You can see that it accepts several inputs if need be. We can add these by pressing the plus symbol, and we can erase them by clicking the X. And clicking on it brings up its configuration. You can think of generate text as your generic LLM call. We provide a prompt, which we can configure in the right-hand panel you can see here. And our prompt can use the node inputs as dynamic values in its content. Let's try writing a basic prompt. Now, I can actually introduce the content of the input by clicking the pill just above the box. You can see that the little lozenge essentially represents that this will be dynamically filled with the contents of this variable. I can click away for now. And we can actually try and run our flow. If I navigate to the top right and hit run, this brings up a modal from which we can actually run the flows. We just need to specify the values of the inputs. So let's try something generic. How about, do you have any job openings? Obviously, we haven't provided any information to the agent, so its response will not be very useful, but we can see that the flow was run and it has tried its best to come up with a sensible response. Let's actually give it some information to work off of. I can close this modal. I'll zoom out a little bit. And let's start by setting up a basic knowledge base that the agent can draw from. To do that, I'll bring in another AI node called knowledge base QA. I'll drag it over here. The knowledge base QA node, as the name suggests, will allow us to specify a knowledge base that the flow can access to try and respond to some query. This means that we'll be using our customer query for both of these nodes. So I'll just drag it back a little bit And I will also provide it as a question for our knowledge base QA node. I'll drag these over here. And I'll create a new input for my generate text node to take into account the response coming from the other node. I can call it QB or KB. And I'll finally provide the answer coming from the other node into generate text. Now we can see that the editor is telling us that we're missing some configuration for the knowledge base QA node. And that stands to reason because we haven't actually set up a knowledge base. So let's do that next. If I click on the Go to Knowledge Bases button, I'm taken to the Knowledge Bases page. A knowledge base is another basic building block in Noxus, but it's something you might already be familiar with. It is a structured repository of data based on documentation, which is optimized for agentic access to respond to questions. So let's go ahead and create a new one. We can do that by hitting Create Knowledge Base, and we can then add some knowledge. As a generic starting point, I've set up this basic PDF with some billing guidelines, and even though these are quite straightforward, there's a couple things that are specific which we can use to try and test our agent. Namely, I can see we only take payments by credit cards, and we are supposed to settle discrepancies and disputes within 2 business days. So let's just navigate back to our knowledge base page and add our file, which we can then upload. We can also rename our knowledge base just as with the flow. Now let's go back to the flow editor. And if we click the drop down, we can now see the knowledge base we just created. So let's select that. And now we need to update the prompt on our generate text node so that it knows to take into account the information coming from this new input. If we click into it, we can now say something like, and once again, we can hit the little button, and this will dynamically fill this with whatever information we get back from the knowledge base QA node. So we can try running this again. Let's try providing a query which actually tests against the data points we saw earlier. We know we're only supposed to take payments by credit cards, so let's try asking for something else. Do you take check? And if I hit run, we can see that the agent has correctly told us that we only take payments by credit card. Let's actually look at the other tab in this modal. You can see that we have a progress tab. And what this shows us is the inputs and outputs at every node, not just the total inputs and total outputs of the whole flow. So for example, if we click into knowledge base QA, we can see that it correctly provided the information based on the documentation it was provided. The results from this analysis were then fed into the generate text node, which we can see as an input here. You can see that these two match. And then generate text was able to provide a correct response. Let's close this for now. And let's add a new data source that our agent can work off of, an FAQ page. To add our FAQ page, let's start by adding a new node. Read web page, which I'll drag down here. Read web page takes in a URL and provides the contents of the page as text, which we can then provide to our agent. So let's go ahead and add a new input for our URL, which we can rename. And actually, because we know that this will be a static value, the URL for the FAQ page will always be the same, we can actually use this configuration for fixed value. And this way we don't need to provide it all the time whenever we want to run the flow. It will be defaulted. As for our actual FAQ page, I have set up this basic page with some questions and answers. Again, fairly generic stuff, but we can see that there's a specific support email address that we're supposed to be pointing our clients towards. So we can probably try and test our agent against that. For now, I'll just copy the link and paste it as the fixed value for my input, which I will then provide to the node. Now I can add a new input to our generate text, same as we did with the knowledge base, and we can provide the contents of the page we find to the generate text node. I will rename it, and I'll once again update the prompt so it takes this into account. You can say something like, we have a runnable flow once more. So let's go ahead and try testing for that support email. I'll hit run. We can see that the FAQ URL input we created is defaulted to the value we provided just before. And let's ask for that support email. All right, let's go ahead and try running it with those inputs. And we can see that the agent was able to give us the correct email address in the response. Let's go ahead and look at the progress again and see how it might have come up with that information. If we go into knowledge base QA, you can see that it wasn't really capable of finding any relevant information as to the query we provided. Again, the only thing in the knowledge base for now is that file with the basic billing guidelines, so nothing about support email addresses. However, if we look at the inputs for generate text, we can see that it had the query to work off of, that knowledge base result we just looked at, which wasn't very helpful, but we also have the contents of the FAQ web page, and it was able to quickly parse the email from that. And really, that's the basic setup for our agent. We now know how to set up basic web pages that we know we might find useful information on, and knowledge bases that we can add more documentation to, and how to generate the response based on all of this information that takes everything into account. In the next video, we'll make this even more usable by hooking up the email integration, which will allow us to do two things. Number one, actually monitor the inbox that we need to make sure we're taking in the customer queries automatically. And number two, actually send the response back as an email and not just as an output on the platform. Thanks for watching.